Hi guys, and welcome back to the world of 28mm. I'm Adam, and in this week's episode we're going to be taking a look at some rivers and how to create them. First of all, I just want to say a big welcome to my new subscribers, anyone who's joined me since my last video. So welcome to you, and thank you for joining me on my rambles of making stuff. One thing before we head down to the table, we need to make ourselves a guide, a jig, what we call a jig, to create our rivers. So to do this, all you've got to do is take an old scrap piece. I've taken some blue foam board here, use something cheap, a bit of cardboard, whatever you can get your hands on, and I've made 4 marks on it, as you can hopefully see. Put it big, there you go. So I've got 4 marks. Now the 2 outside marks are 5 inches apart, and the 2 inside marks there are 3 inches apart. Now the 5-inch mark will mark out your whole piece, I guess. So the base of the river will be 5 inches wide, and then the riverbed itself will be 3 inches wide. It follows my same rules that I use for roads and things like that. 3 inch is usually about the happy medium. So 5-inch marks for the bases, and then the 3-inch mark to know where your river bed is going to be, so we can build the banks up. Okay, so that's your jig. Make one of those, and then we'll head down to the table and we'll crack on. Alright, see you in a minute. Okay, so welcome down to the table. As you can see here, what I've done is I've pre-prepped a base for our river section, and I've beveled the edges to roughly 20-25 degree angle. This will ensure that your models will stand on the side, you know, even your top heavy ones like your standard bearers and whatnot. They should, if you bevel it right, stand up straight on the banks. So we're going to create the bank substructure now. To do this, we're taking our base, and then we're just going to trace it out onto a piece of foam. It could be normal polystyrene, and I've just used blue foam in this case. Now those are the 3-inch marks that we're going to use. They'll be the riverbed, so in between those 3-inch marks will be the riverbed that runs down. So we need to make sure that those 3-inch marks are also put onto the blue foam. Quickly plugging in my sassy hot wire cutter. Some reason taking a long time about it. Okay, so here we go. Now we're just going to chop out these this section. When you're using when you're marking out into blue foam, I tend to use a lot of marker pens because they mark quite well without leaving an indentation. But because they're so thick, I tend to cut on the outside of the line rather than on the inside. It allows you an extra bit of wiggle room. There you'll see I just had a problem. I had a bit of excess poking off the right hand side and I couldn't get it to feed through properly. So we're just trimming up the edges now, making it all nice and clean and as straight as possible. So with those 3-inch marks I just pointed out, we're now going to roughly just draw a line that's about 1 inch thick. It doesn't have to be exactly precise. You can go and mark the whole thing if you want to, but I'm just doing it all sort of by eye. So now we've got that marked out, we just get the hot wire cutter back out again, and we trim off the bits that we've just marked. Once again, because I'm using a thick marker, I'm cutting along the outside of the inside line, so I make sure I've got that extra bit of wiggle room, and then I just repeat again on the other side. So we've got our river banks. The middle piece, don't throw that away, we'll use that in a future project. So we're going to take what will be our river banks now, and we're just going to glue them on with some, I'm using Gorilla Wood glue, but you can use any sort of straight PVA or just nothing like super glue because it will melt through the blue foam. So use a PVA or latex
latex based glue or something. Now the important bit to this is that when we line the riverbanks up, we leave a bit of an overhang, roughly about 2mm of an overhang. I'll show you it in a second. And this will enable us to bevel it at the same angle as the base. So you can see me lining it up there, trying to get it right. And then once that's glued and you're happy, there you can see the overhang there. You've got 2 or 3 more overhang, so we'll see in a sec, that'll help to your beveling. So once that's all down and you're satisfied, take something heavy, in my case a load of graphic novels, and just leave it pinned down for roughly 24 hours. So we've got a good bond now, and we're ready to create or make our banks look a little bit better. So we're going to take off the edges, start off small, just take the edges off, and once you've got the bulk of the edge off, bring it to the edge of the table, and you'll see what I'm doing there is I'm using the length of the knife to stay level with the bevel on the wood, so that it creates the same angle on the blue foam. But make sure, as I almost did there, make sure not to go too far in, because you'll destroy your bank and you'll have to make a patchwork out of it. So use the bevel that's already on the base to shape your banks correctly. And here I'm just trimming off the edges just to make sure it line up right with other sections. So now we're going to get a little bit messy, and we're going to get the good old filler out, poly filler, and a small bit of water. Now this is quite important because we're using resin later on in the project. Resin has a thermic reaction, I think is the term, but basically if we put it straight onto the foam, it'll melt it, it'll eat it away, and you'll end up with a destroyed piece. So this is very important, to give it a good covering in filler. One, it will give you a solid surface for the miniatures to stand on, and more importantly, it will stop the resin from eating away at the foam. Now, I forgot to do this before I started putting the filler on, but take some sandpaper, some fine sandpaper, and just rub down the edges of the inside of the river. This will make sure that it has a nice sort of slopes, so it slopes down into the riverbed. So now we're going back to the filler, just slapping a bit more on and using the water to smooth it all out again. When it comes to the inside of the river, what you ideally want to do is get a nice splodge on your finger. You'll see me do it in a second, and just put a big nice splodge on your finger and run it down the river, the crack there that I'm doing now, and then just put your finger in the water and just guide it along the riverbed to create that slope into the river from the tip of the bank. Then we're just going to repeat that on both sides. So now that filler's all dry, we're just going to throw a bit of sand on it basically. We're going to use some, I'm using, I want to say neat, but as I always say, Directors PVA is always watered down. Directors, why do I keep saying Directors? It's Decorators PVA, sorry. It's always watered down, so I just use it neat straight from the bottle. As you can see there, I've got a blockage in the top, so I'm just pouring it straight on. And give it a good coverage of PVA. And then, important to make sure you get all your edges, otherwise you'll have a bit of a patch job. But give it a good coat of PVA, and then take some sand and just lay it on top of it. So as you can see there, I've missed a few bits, and I've just gone back in with a small brush, hit the bits with some PVA that I've missed, and then just sprinkle some more sand on top. Don't worry too much about 100% coverage, just get the main areas, because we will be going over this with some paint anyway at some point. Once that's all dry, I've got some brown paint there and some directors. I even tried to say it correctly. Oh my goodness. Decorators PVA. And we're going to do roughly a 60-40 mix of both. The brown paint, if you want to know the name, is just a large bottle of Steel Legion Drab, Citadel Steel Legion Drab, or could be Vallejo's English Uniform Brown. By putting the PVA in it, it's just going to basically seal the whole piece. It's going to make it rock solid. It's going to seal the MDF, so when we put the resin in, it's not going to create any bubbles. And yeah, it's just going to generally toughen up the whole thing. And going back to what I was saying earlier, with those spots you've missed with the sand, it's not too much bigger deal, because we're doing this, we're going to paint over it anyway. Just make sure you cover up all that white. Now, this is where the important part comes in of your painting skills. If you haven't attempted this before, I would suggest you get an old piece of cardboard and just practice it yourself a few times first. But it's quite simple once you get the hang of it. So what I'm doing here is I've just taken some burnt umber, which is just a cheap craft paint from one of the local hobby stores. I think it cost £1. And I'm just creating the depth, as it were, in the middle of the river. You can put any colour you like in here. I'm just using quite a nice earthy brown. I quite like burnt umber because it's got that red in it, and it just, yeah, makes a nice deep muddy river. Now once we've got that base layer down, we're then going to go back in with the Steel Legion Drab. Don't wash off your brush, just take off the excess of the old burnt umber, and then go into the Steel Legion Drab and just paint the insides of the bank. Try not to go too far into the riverbed itself, the burnt umber, but we're just going to create a different tone on the side of the bank. Once you've got that tone down, then you want to dry off your brush, and then we're just going to go in and we're going to stipple the line from where the burnt umber meets the Steel Legion Drab. And you just want to stipple it sort of quite lightly after you've dried your brush off, and this is a really simple way of blending two of the same colour. So in this case we're using two browns. So I'm just doing it again. I'm just taking the excess off my brush, and then I'm feathering the Steel Legion Drab into the burnt umber. But because I've still got some burnt umber on my brush, it means that it feathers it in and creates a nice transition. If you don't do this, you will have a very bold, dark line going down the middle, and it won't look very realistic. So now that we've got the paint job done, and once you're happy with it, we're going to start making it look a bit prettier. So once again, I'm taking some neat decorators PVA. There we go, we'll get it eventually. And I'm just going to cover the banks in it. I'm not going to go into too far down the inside of the river bank, because we don't really want grass going into the water. So here I'm just putting a couple of extra blobs on, and for my little magic bowl of stones, I'm just going to put a couple on the banks just to create a bit of undulation and variation. As you'll see later in the film, we're going to use some rocks in the actual river itself, so it's important just to put a few on the side. This helps blend excuse me, blend the blend it all together. Next we're going to go in with some clump foliage. Now these are from foreground, they're just some ones I had spare, so I thought I'll use those. I'm just going to randomly throw on the dark and the light. Got quite a light green and quite a dark one. And the same goes with our flocks. We've got 3 flocks to deal with. They're all Jarvis Scenics from the Premier range. So I'm just putting on some dark there around the rocks. You know, think of it like you're painting, like I said in my previous flocking video, think of it like you're painting a miniature. You know, where the high points are going to be the higher, the lighter the grass, and the darker, the deeper they are, the darker the grass. So pick out your light spots with your light tone, your dark with your dark tone, and then once you're happy with that, just cover it in your mid-tone. I'd say these are all Jarvis Scenics, and don't forget your edges. When it comes to putting these stones on, you can paint them if you like, but mine were just, the ones I've got in that bowl are a variation of greys, so to be fair, I would have just painted them grey anyway. But, you know, if you're using Woodland Scenics, Talus or something, not Talus, is it Talus? I don't know, they're stones that they do, then yeah, you'll probably want to paint them up, but I've just left them grey because, well, that's what colour they already are. So once again, I'm just hitting it up with some of that clump foliage, the dark tone and the light tone. I'm mostly putting it across the top of the bank because that would be where the lighter part is. And then we're just going to go over the whole thing with some mid-tone again. You want to make sure that you give your PVA adequate time to dry, so I usually give it 24 hours before I shake any excess off. I like to make sure it's got a good grip. So once that's all dry, and you can see it's starting to take a bit of shape now. There I've got a box full of Woodland Scenics rocks. I think that box is from the Outcrops mould. And these are quite handy because some of them are very rounded off in shape and can look quite good in a river piece. You can pick the rock moulds up on eBay for relatively cheap. So I made a little mistake here. I decided to glue down the rocks. You'll see me in a minute realise. There you go. Give them a sand first, because obviously the underneath are going to be uneven, so they're not going to adhere very well to the bottom of the bed. You can do this section right at the beginning before you put sand down. So glue them on first, then throw the sand down after them. I chose just to do it in this phase. So we're just going to go through each of them, give them a rub down, make sure their surfaces, the underneath, are nice and flat. And then we're just going to use some normal, regular PVA. I'm using the Citadel one there just because it's a bit thicker and gloopier and it just helps hold a bit more. And we're going to stick them down to the riverbed. Once again, same as the sand and the flocking, make sure the PVA has a good 12 to 24 hours to dry. Now we're just going to base coat the rocks up. I did a section after this where, and me being silly and slightly tired, I forgot to switch the camera or press record on the camera, so I didn't actually record it. So I'll just cover it quickly now. So what I'm doing here is I'm using just a mid-grey tester pot house paint, and I'm just going over the rocks with some of that. Now after that, what I did is it goes back to blending things in again. We need to blend those rocks into the riverbed. To do that, I'm using just some stones from my little magic bowl of stones that you can see in the top right hand of the screen. I'm just going to use some of those, pick out the smaller size ones, and just place them around the edges of the big rocks. And as I say, this will help blend them into the riverbed and just make it look a bit more natural. If you're using, like me, house paints on these rock molds, you're going to want to water it down a little bit, the paint, just because it can have a problem getting into some of the fine detail of the rocks. So just water it down slightly, not heavily, don't make it into a wash, and just water it down slightly and then paint it on, then you'll get a lot better coverage. So you can see the step that I've missed. I've just put some of those stones around. I have painted them this time with the same grey, and then I feathered the grey out like we did with the riverbed, just to blend it into the burnt umber. So to make all of that combination of rocks pop, I'm just going to get, it's an off-white that I've used in previous projects. It's just, once again, a tester pot of house paint. I think it's called crushed almond, and we're just going to dry brush over the tops of the rocks. And it just makes them pop and bring them to life a little bit. So in this stage, we're going to need to seal everything before we do any resin pouring. So to do this, I've done a video on it. I'll put a link up in the top corner. But basically, you need to seal all of your flocks. So I've got one of, I think they're a 50mm tub, the airbrush ones. I've just done a 50-50 mix of Decorator's PVA and water. I believe my airbrush is running at 30 PSI, I believe. Yep, just check the pressure gauge, it's running at 30. Also, just go over the rocks as well, just to make sure they stay put when you pour the resin. So, a very important part about when you're making river sections, or where you're pouring resin and you've got an edge, is to seal it up. Otherwise, you're going to have a very big mess. So to do this, this is quite a reliable method that I've used for a while. Is I've got some builder's masking tape. Don't use the artist stuff. It's the glue on it isn't strong enough, and it will just seep through. So you want to put that on each edge of your piece where you're pouring, making sure that the bond to the substructure, the wood and everything else is nice and firm. In addition to this, and I would highly recommend doing this, is just as a fail-safe, but get some PVA and just run a blob of PVA across the bottom and the sides of the tape, so that if the tape does give way, then you've got that seal of PVA at the bottom to stop it from seeping out. I forgot to actually put that on the video. But yeah, so builder's masking tape, you can pick it up from any hardware store. Make sure it's the medium to strong adherence. And then once it's on, just put a blob of PVA around the edges, and that'll give you double protection, shall we say. So next up we're on to the actual resin itself. So here you can see me using CFS polyester resin. I've used this stuff for a little while now, so I tend to eyeball it more than I do weigh it, but if you're new to using resins, definitely weigh it. But I'm using the maximum amount of catalyst here. Don't use too much or you will end up with cracking in your resin after it's finished drying. But I'm using 3% mix here of catalyst to resin. The only problem with this stuff, or resin in general, is that when you put your catalyst in, or if it's a two-part and you've mixed your bits together, stir it for a very, very long time. Stir it till you're bored, and then stir it some more, and then stir it some more after that. Make sure, if you're using a two-part epoxy, then double cup it, so put 1/2 in one, 1/2 in another, and then keep switching them over to make sure they're all mixed. But stirring is very important, basically because you want that catalyst thoroughly mixed into the resin, otherwise you're going to have soft parts to your river, or it's just not going to set properly. So as I say, stir it till you're bored, and then stir it some more, and then stir it some more again. To make the river a little less gleamy and clean, because we want it to be a muddy river, is we're going to add some Army Painter soft tone ink into it. And as you can see, it just muddies it up quite nicely, and just adds a little bit of extra realism. When I pour the resin in a second, you'll see that I do it to one side first, on like where the tape is. Now this is just to make sure that I have a secure bond. Off camera I've got some very thick acrylic medium that if it all goes wrong I can quickly put some of that in it and it should stop the leak. But you can see there I just put some next to the tape, and with my gigantic head getting in the way I make sure it's not leaking outside. So I'm happy with that, and we just pour away, making sure that we don't get any on the tops of the rocks, because we want the water to be running around the rocks and not over it. And you can see there I keep shifting it because I think I thought I had a leak on one side, so I kept moving it to see if there was like a greasy spot where I potentially had a leak on the paper. But no, it was all good. So once you're happy with the depth of your pour, you next want to get yourself a stick, or in this case I'm just going to use the mixing spoon, and we're just going to tease it to the edges, really. It's highly advised that you do this, especially with this polyester stuff, because it does tend to, if you don't tease it properly to the edge, and you'll see in the bottom right hand corner of the river there, you'll see there's like a shadow across the bank, and that's because I didn't tease it to the edge properly, and you'll see that it leaves like a crack, but don't worry about that, we can get rid of that. So leave that at least, I think I left this 3 days, but leave that at least 24 hours to dry properly. Basically when it stops smelling, it's cured. At the edges, when you take the tape off, you will find that there's a meniscus to the resin where as it's met the masking tape and it's set, it's expanded and then shrunk, so there's like a lip or a meniscus to the edges. So we're just going to go over that with a knife and just take the tip of it off. Don't go too far down, because you'll end up scratching the nice glossy surface of the resin, and yeah, might turn things into a disaster before you've finished. So next up, we're just going to add a bit more life to it to say that it's a flowing river. And to do this, we're going to use the Woodland Scenics water effects. Well, we're going to use a combo, but for this part we're using the Woodland Scenics water effects. All you're going to do is take yourself a smallish brush and work in roughly 1.5 to 2 inch sections, and then we're going to go in, quick zoom, we're going to go in with the airbrush with very gentle strokes. I'm only working the airbrush at I believe it was around 10 psi, maybe 15. And from a distance, just go in and a quick sort of shot of air and push that medium forward. Try not to push it too far because, as you can probably see, I'm getting some patches. But you just want to use the airflow from the airbrush to create that natural stream flow and try and follow the contours of your stream at the same time. So here it's bending around to the left, so I'm going to need to make sure that the airbrush starts teasing it around to the left a little bit before I move on to the next section. Now this will take some practice. It took me a good couple of months to sort of get my head around of how to position the airbrush and how much to do in one section, shall we say. But like I say, take your time on it. Don't go too close or you'll end up with splashes of acrylic medium everywhere. Sort of stay roughly about 5 mil, because your PSI is very low, don't forget. So yeah, about 5 mil above the medium, and then tease it around gently. And just do it in short burst sprays. Don't keep your finger on the trigger, just quick spray, off, spray, off, spray, off. And going back to the flow of the river, remember which way you want it to go, because when you come to rocks and things like that, it's going to change the outcome of how the ripples are going to form. So we've got quite a slim passage between those two rocks there, which means that area is going to probably be quite frothy because the water's coming in not at a heavy pace, as you can see from the ripples, but a relative speed, and it's going to create a little bit of white water in the middle. So we're going to leave that area a little bit thicker. Now, as we come in towards the end, we've still got the meniscus at the bottom. Like I said, you can trim it back, but you can't get rid of all of it because you risk scratching your nice gloss effect that you've made with the resin. So as we come towards the end, I just leave that bit blank so we can drag the acrylic medium forward, as you can see there. Just add a little bit more. And just to cover up the meniscus, we're going to take the brush again and we're just going to brush over so we've got a solid flat white bit there, and it kind of levels everything off, and then just give that a quick stipple with the brush, and that'll ensure that it still looks natural. A quick note of, if you get any cracking with your resin, this is a good time to patch it up. Now, because this stuff dries clear, this acrylic medium, you can fill in any of the cracks that it's made around the edges. So as I said previously, I noticed that one of the corners I didn't tease the resin properly, so I just went in with some of that acrylic medium and just filled it in, and honestly you can't notice it anymore. So there's a little tip that if you do get some cracking, you can fill it in with this medium. So we've got a good coverage of that, and it makes it look as if we've got some active water. So all we're going to do now is, just to finish it off, is we're going to use some of the acrylic, Vallejo acrylic gel medium, and this is going to help us to create the white water from when the water hits the rocks. Once again, like the woodland scenic stuff, it does dry clear, so be aware where you're putting it, because we're going to need to go over it later with a bit of a dry brush. But this, I'm just using this to show you both that you can use this for both effects. But make sure you get your placements right, so as the water's hitting the rocks, it's going to be running around, and then it's going to run into a trail as it gets further down the river. It's always definitely handy to have some reference photos to hand. So you can see there we're just trailing off the what will be white water. So then the last step is literally just going to get some white paint. So in this case I'm using ceramite white from Citadel. And you're going to want a fairly small brush, which I should have done in the first place because I almost messed the whole thing up because I had some water stuck in the brush from when I washed it. So use a nice small brush and a bit of white, and then just gently dry brush over the tops of those stipples that you made around the rocks. And this will just help pick it out, and it adds an extra bit of life really. And it also indicates to the viewer which way the stream is flowing. That's providing if my gargantuan head wasn't in the way. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this project. You can see that white's just added the extra effect. So once this is finished, once I've finished up here, I'll throw up a quick picture of it so you can have a look as a finished piece. And I'll see you in the outro.
And there you have it, guys. There's this week's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I've loved getting my hands dirty again and making stuff rather than doing all these sort of product reviews and all of that sort of stuff, which I enjoy, but you know me, I like getting my hands dirty and, you know, cracking on with stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. I'll leave you to it this week. So the usuals for the video: like if you liked it, share if you think anyone else would like to see it, and don't forget to subscribe for the next episode.